Hello, this is Carrie Shekelhoff, and we're going to think a little bit about learning to write like a researcher. Now, I think that when we talk about writing like a researcher, you may be thinking about writing your capstone proposal, and writing your lit review, similar to what we see here in Tony Lobello's lovely and finished capstone. But in actuality, the the work of learning to write like a researcher begins with much smaller tasks. And so we're going to learn some writing strategies today that will help you build some analytic and content knowledge so that you'll be able to write the capstone like this. Okay, so let's get started. When you write your capstone proposal and when you write your literature review in your capstone, you will be writing like this. So you will be making some statements about things that you have learned about the content that you are writing your capstone on. And you will relate those things that you have learned to the resources from which you've gleaned that information. So you'll see in-text citations like this: Guthrie, 2004, Stanovich, 1986, Allington, 2012, page 46. And we are going to learn how to do the in-text citations like this, whether they are a way of showing that you've kind of summarized someone's thinking. This is what we would call like a summarization in text citation, or how to directly quote something. So right here, Tony found something that was so well worded from Dick Allington, which Dick Allington is my hero, so I think everything he writes is like this. But so she chose to include a direct quote: struggling readers will need to read even more than better readers do. And so there's a particular way to cite that. This technique for in-text citations is not what we're talking about today. We will talk about that. But really, I want you to think about some writing techniques that come before even that, okay? So what are we going to talk about today? Well, when we think about being able to write like Tony, being able to write those in-text citations, we can do that. We will be able to do that. But in order to do that kind of writing, we need to have two tools. So here's our little tattoo. Our two tools are going to be active reading, which is going to involve writing, and annotations. Okay? So the idea is, in order to be able to write like the kinds of texts that we are reading in our for our lit review, we're going to first need to write in this way. Okay, what do I mean by active reading? Active reading just means that while you are reading a text, be it a research article, a theoretical piece, or a curriculum piece, think about it as you having a conversation with the author. And so as you're reading, a couple of strategies that I would encourage. One, I like to highlight. This is a piece that I'm reading for some work that I'm doing. And you can see I'm highlighting anything that really stands out to me. I'm also kind of, what I mean by having a conversation with the author is, as the author says something that I'm trying to figure out, I put little notes here. I just write my thinking on top of the article. So it's like we're having a conversation. And you certainly see more of this as the text progresses. When I see the author, like giving me some information that's really nice that I want to keep track of, like right here, this is an article by Linnea Henry about orthographic mapping. And right here, she talks about orthographic mapping being dependent on three things. And then I number them out to remind myself. The three things are phonemic awareness, graphophonemic understanding, and decoding, right? So whatever your response, whatever form your response takes, write that response on this paper. I mean, there's research been done that taking notes physically by hand actually increases the memory of what you're note taking. And in order to write that lit review and to call up these different authors that you're reading and what significant findings they had, you need to get some of that information in your head by writing about it on this page. And then we're going to write about it in another form that'll help you remember. So this is all part of understanding and remembering the things that you're reading. So take notes, highlight. If I find something that's really, really useful, I sometimes put 2 stars by it because I might want to quote that particular piece directly, and then I can find it really quickly, right? There's another thing that can happen too is as you're reading, the author that you're reading may talk about somebody else's research or somebody else's theory or instructional idea that you say, wait, that would be really useful to me. This happens all the time, and it's one of the best ways that I find things that relate to my work. So I'm reading along here, and I notice that this author is talking about a particular way of learning letters that's very useful. And I'm all about the alphabet as an early childhood person, right? So she mentions in her writing here this Schmidman and Ari. And so I circle it, and then I go to the reference list in the back of the article, and here it is, Schmidman and Ari, 2010, Embedded Picture Mnemonics to Learn Letters. And it's in a journal called Scientific Studies of Reading. And so I'm just going to mark this because that's the next article I want to read. This Linnea article is very close to what I need for the lit review that I'm writing, but this piece right here actually looks like it's even closer to what I'm interested in if my paper is really about letter formation and learning letters. So as you're reading, active reading means writing on the text so you can keep track of your thinking. Find parts that are just beautifully written that you might want to quote. If you have questions or responses to what the author is saying, write those out in the margins so you can remember what was interesting about their work and what was your response to their thinking. And also, as you find citations mentioned, go back to the references section and highlight them so that you can look them up later. And we will talk in another screencast about how to find these resources using the Otterbein Library website. Okay, for now, just highlight them. Okay, so that's one of the writing tools that you're going to use. Writing like a researcher means as you're reading, you're writing notes on that article. Okay, that's the first piece. And that will actually make it easier for you to do the second thing. And the second thing is called an annotation. All right. So eventually, we're going to write paragraphs like this, right? With these citations very cleanly dropped into our argument, right? In order to get to that point, though, we're going to take notes on the things that we read in particular ways. And during our time working together, we'll use these annotations to have conversations about what we read. Taking the notes during active reading, creating the annotation, and then having a conversation about what you've read is all part of you getting a handle on the content that you're reading so that you can write about it with authority. In your annotation, there are some things that you're going to include. The first thing you're going to include is the APA citation for whatever you've read. So on your Blackboard, you have a link to this annotation rubric. And when you open up that document on Blackboard, this little APA citation 4th edition live link will take you to the Purdue Writing Center's website, which is just fantastic. And I use that a lot because it shows you all of the formatting for how to create an APA citation. It's just like a recipe file. If you're using a chapter in a book, there's one way to do it. If you're using an article in a journal, there's another way to do it. So it shows you how to do an APA citation for anything, even a website, okay? Your APA Style Manual number 4 also gives you all of that information. You should have it, use it now, because as you're taking notes on the articles that you read and creating these annotations, it is so much easier to learn how to write the citation now and use it every time you read an article. And in a sense, you'll be creating your bibliography for your capstone proposal and your capstone way before you're to the point of writing it, right? So let's just get all the resources in the appropriate format. So you're going to include the APA citation of your article. The next thing you're going to include is the type of article that you've read. So just like in Screencast 1, is this a research article? Is it a theoretical piece? Or is it a curriculum piece? Or is it a review of research? And in your annotation, it's maybe 3 or 4 sentences. You're just going to name what type of article this is, and then you're going to explain how you know that. The third thing your annotation is going to include is a summary of the key points. Now, if you've read a 10-page article, your summary of the key points could, be, 1 or 2 pages, right? Depending on how much meat there was in that particular piece that you read. Sometimes your annotation may be only a half of a page because you can really summarize the whole idea of the article down to a few sentences. But other times, if you've read an entire book or 3 book chapters, 3 chapters of a book, you may have a more extensive annotation. The size is not important. What's important right here is this, that you're providing a summary of the main points of what you've read. What is it that's important to your work? And that you're clearly explaining those main points. And that what you're explaining is done in a way that's clear and communicates well, right? So it's not how much you write. It's that you've written in a clear way and that you've identified the most important parts. Now, in the beginning of our work together, we'll practice this idea of finding the most important parts, because that's not always easy, right? Okay. The other thing I want you to think about is finding a key quote or 2, or maybe 3, if it's, a larger piece. But find a place where the author says something very well that's extremely important to the argument, okay? So pull that quote out, write what page it's on. You may be using that in the future as you write your capstone lit review. And then lastly, I would challenge you to make some connections. Either make connections between what you're reading and your classroom practice, or you could make a connection between what you've read in that article and what you know to be at this point your capstone focus. So you may not know exactly what direction your capstone is going to take, but it's about phonics, right? So make that connection between this article and something that you know about phonics. If you know exactly what your project is, then you can make a more specific connection, right? Or you could make a connection, so a connection between the article and your practice, a connection between the article and your capstone topic, or a connection between this article and another article you've read. So as we read through the term, you'll have multiple little pieces of annotation, and you might start to make some connections across the pieces that you've read. Now, as you see, this rubric is organized so that I'm describing to you what's really not acceptable. It's not acceptable to not have a complete or appropriately formatted APA citation, right? Because it's pretty easy to do. And then it is worth 1 point if you've done it, right? It's either there, it's not. The biggest amount of points are allotted for the summary of the key points. And so you can get a number of points out of 10, okay? As we're beginning, I really want you to work toward mastery. So I would say at least after the third annotation that you do, you're going to really have a good sense of what should be included, and you'll be confident that you can create that kind of annotation. In the beginning, if you turn in an annotation and I gave you back feedback that maybe the APA was not correct and that you missed some key points, then you have an option to go back and rewrite that so that you can show me that you've mastered this annotation process, and you can get full points on those, right? I just ask because things can kind of get, snowball. So I would appreciate if you're going to rewrite something that you do it by the week after you originally turn it in. So you've got 7 days to kind of turn that around. Again, the idea here is that you learn how to write these kinds of summaries about the things that you're writing so that later on down the road, in 3 or 4 weeks, you can start putting the information that you've written about in your active reading on the article and in your annotations into these more refined paragraphs for research writing. Okay? All right, on your Blackboard site, there are 2 documents. One is, it looks like this. It's the annotation rubric, so you could take a look at that, and that'll help you think about what you're about to do next, which is you are going to write an annotation. But before you write an annotation, how about let's just take a minute and give you a chance to read an example of an annotation. So that article that I showed you my notes on, this one, the Linnea Henry article, taking all these crazy notes in the margins, and that has helped me to write an annotation. The annotation is available right here to you on Blackboard. I'll read 2017 annotation example by Carrie. And what I'd like you to do is read that annotation, take a minute, and then think about how you would evaluate that using this rubric. So you have the rubric, you have the annotation. I want you to actually stop the video now, pause the video, go look at that annotation. It's only 2 pages long, double-spaced. And then think through where you are finding all of the elements on this rubric. All right? When you've finished doing that, come back to the video and hit play. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video now. Did you pause the video? I mean, really, go read that article. It'll make you feel better. Okay, so I'm going to assume that we're back and that you've read that little annotation example. All right. First of all, formatting does not matter to me as long as you have all of these pieces. So you can use the formatting that I'm modeling, or you can make it different for you, whatever works for you. All right. So right here we have the citation, and this is a book chapter in an edited volume, and I've used the APA's 4th style manual to do that, complete with the DOI link, and so I'd give that a 1 here. You agree? All right, the article type, it's a theoretical article. Henri is using research to create a model about how kids learn sight words called orthographic mapping. And then she uses research to explain that particular theory that she's developed, okay? So I have named the type of article and explained it. So I'd give myself a 1 there. And then we have here is the body of the text. And I'm explaining the most important parts of that article. I have a quote here and a little follow-up quote here about what is orthographic mapping, and then I use the text that follows to kind of amplify and explain how Linnea Henry is talking about orthographic mapping in that quote. So I've identified a quote, and I give myself 2 there because I've also explained it. And then last, at the very end, sorry guys. At the very end, the second page of this, I'm talking about how this article relates to my practice as an early literacy teacher. Okay, so I would give myself a point there. So I would suggest that when you write your first annotation, you draft it, and then after you've drafted it, use the annotation rubric to actually score your work. And if you find that, oh gosh, actually, I forgot to identify the type of article this is, that gives you a chance to go back and fix it, right? That's why we do rubrics, so that you can independently, as the learner, look at the criteria, identify anything that you've missed, and then fix it up before it's being assessed. Okay? So here it is. Yes, you can do this. So the next piece is we're going to actually have you practice this. So you are going to, I would just take a look at that rubric if you haven't already done it, just to keep it in your head. And then you are going to look at the, what's it called? Module 1 form that you looked at after Screencast 1. And at the bottom of it, it has this little prompt. It says that now after watching Screencast 2, I want you to try writing an annotation for one of those 3 green articles that you have earlier identified. So you've earlier identified those 3 green articles. You identified if they were research articles or theoretical pieces or curricular pieces, right? So now I want you to pick one. You pick any one that you want of those green ones and read it carefully. Do some active writing right on the text, right on there. Highlight. Take a look at anything that would be interesting to you in the bibliography. And then write your first annotation. When you're finished with the annotation, use the rubric to check to make sure you have all of the criteria that are going to be looked at in that annotation. And then you're going to send that first annotation to me by Sunday, May 16th at 5 p.m. or whenever it says on your syllabus, right? And we'll have a chance to talk about it and think about what you need to do differently with your writing like a researcher. All right. If you have questions or concerns, shoot me an email or a text and we can work through those. Happy writing.